Originally, I wanted to do this video last year, but some stuff came up. 2 of our editors left the team, which leaves only me. Also, 3 months ago, I had a kid, a newborn son. So it goes without saying that I've been kind of busy the last couple of months. Nonetheless, geopolitics waits for no one. And with that being said, let's do the Q&A right now. The questions we will go over were submitted on Patreon. And by the way, I apologize for the unusual camera angle, but I had nowhere else to station it. So we'll have to make the best of it. Anyway, welcome to Caspian Report. My name is Shivan, and let's go over the questions. The first question by Largezo: what is your educational background? I studied journalism, but at first I was conflicted between history and geopolitics. I wanted to do both, so I chose journalism. There I learned to research, write, and basically ask the right questions. I also worked for years as a camjo, and if you don't know what that entails, a camjo is a special reporter who goes out to the field, who does the research, writing, video, sounds, editing, etc. Basically, a camjo does the work of at least 3 people. I use those skills to cover both historical and geopolitical topics on Caspian Report. But frankly, they don't teach anything related to geopolitics in journalistic studies. They teach you how to write and produce reports, but the quality of the work is entirely in your hands. Next question by Manuel Singer, who wants to know whether I am financially reliant on Patreon supporters, and given the risks, why it's worth it. In a nutshell, I still work part-time at another firm, so I don't entirely rely on Patreon. I have been considering to pursue Caspian Report full-time, and of course there are risks involved, but then again, there are no financial guarantees anywhere, even at traditional firms. Employment security is merely an illusion that we all want to believe and embrace. At the end of the day, I of course enjoy working at Caspian Report more than anything else. So this is where my passion lies. But before I can go full-time, the Patreon community would have to grow first, so I can cover personal expenses. Next question by Armin Soika, who wants to know how I ensure the integrity of content. Well, I work thoroughly, and I try to present a clear context of events. To do this, I can't cut corners. Which is also why I can't stick to a weekly release schedule as other channels do. Reports are finished when they are finished, not sooner. I'm not going to rush things out for the sake of it. Besides, I also recognize my own bias and do my best to remain impartial. If I do make a factual error, I correct it with the help of the Patreon community, and this is actually why we have the 24 hours early access. Taken together, these measures allow me to ensure the integrity of our content. Next question by Rob. He wants to know how much time and research goes into producing an average video. The production takes me about a day. There's nothing really fancy about the visuals of Caspian Report. The research, however, that takes up the most time. And it's different for every report. For instance, the research on current topics can be completed between 4 to 5 days. Historic content, well, that takes over a week. And geopolitical profiles on countries, well, those take months, because I have to work on those while doing other reports. And taken together, the average video takes about a week. The next question is whether there have been threats against me or my family for the content of Caspian Report. Well, besides internet trolls, I have never faced any serious threats. I have been fortunate enough. But that doesn't mean political harassment isn't common in Azerbaijan. One example is the case of Mehman Huseynov, a young journalist/blogger with integrity who exposes corruption and abuse of power in our country by sharing satirical and playful videos and memes. Mehman was detained 2 years ago on fabricated charges, and he will be released in March 2019. Now, government officials will not approve of what I'm about to do next, but I have set up a GoFundMe page for Mehman. Every penny that is donated there will go towards helping him to continue to do his critical work. So if you want to do more than just press the like button, go to our GoFundMe page and donate $1. The link will be in the description. Next question by Marwan Marios, who wants to know about my biases. My bias is my background and the environment I grew up in. The Azeri society has a different interpretation of socialism, liberalism, capitalism, and even organized religion. So, for instance, one of my biases is that I believe firmly in secularism and science. I don't like governments that try to push their religious beliefs upon the people, like in Iran or Saudi Arabia. And I talk about this stuff all the time with my relatives. So that's definitely a bias, one of the many biases. The only way to deal with bias is by acknowledging it. As a result, I don't share my opinions in the content of Caspian Report. I have opinions too, like everyone else, and therefore I have biases, but I recognize those and try to distance myself from opinion, fact, and objective news. As a result, the content of Caspian Report does not necessarily reflect my own beliefs or opinions. Next question by Huseynov, who asks about Germany's natural gas dependency on Russia and what my opinion is on the Medgas network between Algeria, Spain, and the rest of Europe. This is quite an interesting question. Germany's gas dependency on Russia is one of Berlin's greatest weaknesses. The Medgas network is promising, but there are alternative routes as well, such as the Nabucco pipeline. The best way to reduce dependency on Russian energy is by embracing all kinds of alternative pipeline networks, as well as renewable energy technologies, which Germany, by the way, excels at. But in the short term, the most efficient way to reduce natural gas dependency on Russia is by embracing American LNG. Last year, the United States launched 9 export projects related to LNG. That will more than double the country's collective capacity, so America is swiftly rising the ranks as a major exporter of liquefied natural gas. By the end of 2019, it will become the 3rd largest exporter of LNG. The Trump government is seeking for ways to compete with Russian gas in Europe, and Germany in particular is an attractive market for American LNG. So this is Germany's best bet to reduce energy dependency on Russia in the short term with tangible results. The trouble is that most European policymakers, especially German policymakers, still see energy in the context of economic terms, whereas the Russians and the Americans see it in geopolitical terms. Therefore, before Berlin can truly enhance its energy security, German officials must first come to think of energy in political terms. Next question by Stephen, who wants to know what I think will be the greatest geopolitical effect of Trump's presidency. By far the most long-lasting influence is that Trump has accelerated the collapse of the remnant institutions of the Bretton Woods system, like NATO. One of the appeals of NATO in the 1950s was that it offered the European powers a way to divert their defense expenses to the United States. Back then, the American economy could handle it, so the Europeans were encouraged to maintain minimum militaries. For the Americans, this was an advantage, because without European military competition, especially in the sphere of navy, the Americans could expand and solidify their global reach. For the Europeans, it was beneficial as well because they could divert their military spending to other sectors of the economy. But when Trump says that the Europeans must increase their military spending, he is effectively upending one of the pillars of NATO. The fact that Washington still pays for the European military expenses is unfair, but that is the price of being a superpower. Now, France and Germany are trying to establish a unified military force. Of course, that is not going to happen overnight, but neither is this topic going to go away even if a different president occupies the White House. So this is not just a phase. European policymakers will take steps to press for a divorce from America. They will take active and irreversible steps to prepare for a post-NATO world. This divorce was bound to happen either way, but Trump has accelerated that process by decades. Next question by David Harrison, who asks about the population boom in Africa and how it will impact the world. It is predicted that by the end of this century, 1 in every 3 people will be African. And since human capital is a driving force in geopolitics, the surge of Africa will no doubt change the continent's output. That means more formidable African economies, but not for everyone. Currently, not enough is being done to prepare for the demographic surge. So besides growing economies, we will also see a humanitarian catastrophe in Africa, which means that Africans will continue to migrate north to Europe in search of better livelihoods. Altogether, the population boom in Africa is definitely one of the top 5 geopolitical developments of the 21st century. The final question by Kurt Pillman, who wants to know if there should be a preemptive attack on Russia's military if tensions keep rising between Russia and NATO. Should there be? No, there shouldn't. A preemptive strike on Russia or regime change in that country will not work. In fact, it could even backfire on the perpetrator. If you want to defuse the situation with Russia, you need to look at the country's geography and demography. You'll see that unless the Kremlin regains control of the former Soviet Union borders, the government in Moscow is collapsing under its own weight, and time is not on their side. So there is a sense of urgency in Moscow, which is why the Russians seem extraordinarily assertive. I also want to add that the collapse of Russia is not something you want. Just as the collapse of Saddam's Iraq, Gaddafi's Libya created these vacuums of power and encouraged regional conflicts, the collapse of Russia would have consequences the likes of we have not seen in living memory. So this isn't something to be taken lightly. Anyway, that's it for this Q&A. Thank you all for these questions. These were a ton of fun to do. But I'm going to work on the Asia Pacific report for 2019. I still have a lot to do. In the meantime, check out our fundraising page on patreon.com/CaspianReport and consider joining our community. We got some interesting perks like early access, references, polls, etc. And even more importantly, by joining Patreon, you will help to keep Caspian Report independent and self-sustained. In any case, I'm signing off. Thank you for sticking with me until the end, and so